if I could go back to your description of how in these Western nations, these Western relationships with Western states, you talk about the ways in which they have sought to minimize First Nations people's relationships in the way you've described it to land.
Yes.
I wonder, I haven't thought about this, but I wonder how can a white nation not afford not to minimize? Because if you lift up this relationship that you're describing and you begin to engage it, which is a deeply Christian understanding of creation, if you begin to lift that up and take it seriously, it fundamentally undermines the very basis of modern Western societies.
Yes.
Am I overstating that?
No, I think that's right. I think that's right. And I would say that at some point in time, regardless of if Western culture, Western society, the growing global culture of money, if it attempts to ignore this difficulty within its system, the consequences are corrosive in terms of their impact on society's capacity to operate and our future in terms of sustainability.
One of my responses, it's initially emotional, not one that, but it's important, is that, but we are a society whose roots for the last 300 or 400 years have been shaped by capitalism and by what we currently call neoliberalism.
Yes.
And the only way capitalism can thrive is by turning land, as you describe it, into resource commodity for extraction and for use.
Yes.
And alienating language. And so I'm not asking for answers here, I'm asking for conversation, but the question that bubbles up is, how do we engage this? Because for me, as a white European who owns real estate, it sounds like I got to give all this up. You understand what I'm trying to get at here?
Yeah.
But and I don't want to pound you with a pile of questions, but I think what you're describing is right. But the very notion of healing isn't something that I can get dealt with at a therapist. It is about being rooted and grounded. It's about a radically different understanding of land.
Yes.
How do these conversations take place? Where do you see them potentially taking place, Mark?
Well, I see them taking place in multiple venues. I think we're seeing some evidence, pretty minimal yet, that this is going to have an impact on the legal tradition, in the sense that people are beginning to speak about the environment, the land, rivers, having rights, defining the land in such a way that it has rights. I listened to a program on NPR the other day, in which they were talking about the concept of rights, of the rights of personhood, applying to animals. Specifically, they were talking about elephants.
Mm-hmm.
It seems to me that these conversations are pointing out the moral and spiritual limitations of the Western concept of land. And so, and raising it in a venue that has some impact on how these things are being. But I think from a Christian point of view, we have to articulate, and I think that's what Pope Francis was trying to get at. We have to articulate the ancient sources of our understanding of humanity's relationship to the universe and to God. We have to re-articulate in such a way that we restate for a modern world a more fully orbed conception of what human life means in relationship to others. It seems to me that these conversations, which are happening philosophically, legally, morally, religiously, that these conversations are where this is going to be brought forward. My concern, my fear, has to do with the timing of it, because it seems to me that we should have had this conversation a number of decades ago.
Mm-hmm.
That we're facing a crisis in terms of the capacity of this legal cultural system, based as it is upon this unhappily limited view of humanity and its relationship to creation. It seems to me that this is threatening our future in a way that it's moving so quickly that one wonders whether we will have the time to re-articulate these things in a way that is saving, in a way that is healing. So we need to be about it. That's for sure.
Yeah, and part of the ways of being about it are, if I hear you right, of asking how do we reconnect with stories that come from before the modern period.
Yes.
In terms of Christian imagination and identity.
Yes.
And that really takes me to something that has struck me about the reading I've been doing amongst First Nations peoples, is that your community continually talks about its elders.
Yes.
And you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but and your elders, it seems to me, have some kind of deep understanding that it's their responsibility to carry and embody amongst themselves the stories of the land.
Yes.
And its past and its livingness and our relationship with it.
Yes.
In other words, it seems to me what I'm wrestling with is that for reasons I don't understand, your people have endowed in your elders something that goes back a very, very long way.
Yes.
When I think of the elders of the white Euro-tribal churches, now I'm 71, so I might be close to that.
Yes.
We are so embedded, we are so shaped by this modern notion of land as commodity, of kind of rational actions and agencies, that sometimes I ask the question, how do we find and become the kind of elders that we need to be to create the conversations with across peoples that no longer minimize these kinds of realities?
Yes.
Am I making sense? I'm going to ask you to answer the question.
Yes. Well, but what in my mind, what has been very, very important is the question of spiritual formation. And it seems to me that we have to begin by admitting that all of us have been deeply impacted by the spiritual formation that has happened in the broader culture, the culture of money.
Right.
And to be there's various levels of that. There's counter forms of spiritual formation that happen in places like indigenous communities, and one would hope that they happen in Christian communities. But it seems to me that the most of the Christian communities allow the fundamental spiritual formation, meaning the imagination, the ideals, and ethics of their people, allow that to happen with outside of the religious community, with outside of the spiritual community. There has to be an attempt, communally, I think, to shape in a countercultural way the imagination, the values, the ideals of our Christian community. And it seems to me that that's fundamental to creating elders. It will help to look at older people and people of wisdom and age, people who embody the ideals of our community. It will help to look at them in a different way, inspired by the indigenous example.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that will fall short until and unless we see a recommitment to forming and shaping indigenous, non-indigenous and indigenous people alike in this renewed understanding of what land is from a moral, spiritual, pre-modern understanding.
Mm-hmm. And perhaps I'm just going to make, this is just an asterisk here, that perhaps another stage would be a conversation together around what might be some experiments on the ground in which we could start to do that.
Yes.
But that's another conversation.
Yeah.